Re-election campaign.
Protect America.
Officially launch my campaign.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who's gonna pay for the wall?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our very special guest, who is Mr. Jonny Daniels. Jonny, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Mr. Jonny Daniels is a founder of the Foundation From the Depths, a man of four nationalities, proud Israeli, British, Polish, and Jew. The Foundation From the Depths was set up by a group of descendants of Holocaust survivors who wanted to bridge past to the future.
Mr. Daniels, I would like to ask you a few questions about Donald Trump's policy toward Israel. How do you find President Trump's first term in office? At first, he was portrayed as a candidate who would further destabilize the Middle East region, make it less stable, as well as the whole world. But in fact, Trump has contributed to a historic great peace deals between the State of Israel and certain Muslim countries like United Arab Emirates. At first, they agreed to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. Later, we had Bahrain also recognizing Israel and establishing diplomatic relations. And lately, we had Sudan doing the exact same thing. Do you think that President Donald Trump can take credit for those historic peace deals?
Absolutely. I think what we've seen in the first term of President Trump is a different approach to dealing with the Middle East and a different approach to dealing with the environment. I think that what we've seen is a way of looking at it from a perspective of business, perhaps, where the understanding was to make a deal, was to bring sides together under common interests, to push forward with something that was going to give both sides a chance to really build from it. In Israel, I can tell you that we are remarkably grateful for not just, obviously, and most importantly, the peace that we've seen with our Arab neighbors, some of them and hopefully furthermore, but also what we saw with his understanding of the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, the recognizing of the Golan Heights and everything else as well. It's truly been amazing, and we really are incredibly grateful for what we've seen under President Trump.
Do you think those accomplishments will get Trump re-elected?
I don't know. I don't know at all. I think it's a lot more than his policy about Israel. There's so much dealing with the United States in terms of internal politics and everything connected to that. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens. Regardless, Israel has wonderful friends in the Democratic Party as well. So even if Biden were to be elected this evening, or over the next few weeks, depending on what happens with the results this evening, I know that the relationship will stay strong. The state of Israel will remain an important factor for the American people. So whatever happens tonight, I feel safe and confident that the relationship will continue to grow between the United States and the State of Israel.
I would like to ask you a question on Iran, because Iran is a very important part of this chessboard, Middle Eastern, or the chessboard of the greater Middle East, and President Trump decided to exert maximum pressure on Iran in order to bend Iran to his will. And to some extent it did pan out well, to some extent it didn't. How do you assess, what is your opinion, what is your take on the policy of President Trump towards Iran?
Look, President Trump's policy towards Iran, I believe, was exactly the policy that was needed. What we saw with President Trump and his policy in Iran was a strong take towards Iran and dealing with Iran in a way that needed to be taken. The policy under President Obama was atrocious, it was wrong, and it was harmful not just for Israel but for the entire region. It destabilized everything. Iran needed the sanctions. They needed to be pushed into a corner because a possibility of a nuclear Iran is something that none of us can deal with, that none of us should hold lightly. Just over the last few days, we're seeing an increase, unfortunately, in the most horrendous terrorist attacks in Nice, in France, in Vienna, in Austria. And if anybody thinks that this is not connected between the state run and sponsor terror that we see in Iran and other countries, they've really mistaken. And I think that this is something that has pushed Iran back into a corner. And I'm 100% positive that if Trump is re-elected, one of the first calls that he will receive is from Iran, with them saying, okay, let's talk about a deal, let's figure something out, let's try and move forward, because Iran cannot have another 4 years of these sanctions. They're hurt economically terribly. You know, I know many Iranian people. These are good people. These are people who want to live a normal life, who want to live in happiness. Unfortunately, they've been hijacked by a tremendously bad regime. And it's this regime that's under attack by the United States and the allies correctly, and hopefully will push forward. And so I really do, and I'm incredibly grateful for the policy of President Trump regarding Iran. I think more than anything, it gives us an opportunity to keep safe and to make sure that we all stay safe in the future.
Yeah, I see. And one more question with regards to Iran. How do you think to what extent can China help Iran endure this severe beating from the U.S.? Because as far as we can observe, there are relations between China and Iran seem to tighten a little bit. It has two sides, of course, because on the one hand, the relations between there were Iran and China used to try in the past to tighten relations, but it didn't pan out so well because China is used to have big plans, and not always are these plans successful. How do you think, to what extent can China help Iran overcome this crisis? Because it is a crisis for Iran.
Right, of course. I mean, obviously there is a crisis. I don't think China will help too much. At the end of the day, China is an opportunist country. We all know that. I was honored a few years ago to be one of the first people to enter South Sudan when it was declared a state. The second delegation, I was with the Israeli parliamentary delegation. We entered literally almost straight after Hillary Clinton was there as the Secretary of State from the United States. And one of the things that shocked me so much as I entered the country was seeing that a country that had literally been declared a state, there were street lights everywhere, all paid up and put up by China within a matter of days. It was an amazing thing to see. China are opportunists, and they'll push and try and get influence wherever and however they can. And one of the places that they are pushing and are trying to get the influence is also in Iran. But again, we're going to see, if President Trump is re-elected, a different policy towards Iran and also towards China. President Trump has been very direct in terms of what he views of coronavirus, or as he calls it, the Chinese virus. And I think there'll be a lot of conversations that take place with China. And I don't think this open policy that China has towards Iran will fly under President Trump. I think that he's going to tighten down on that. And I think that will make a major difference too. So I don't see that China will be able to help Iran in the means that they need to be helped.
Okay, thank you.
Jonny, let me get back to the peace deals I mentioned before. Those deals on the Middle East were reached in a pretty short period of time. Do you have any concerns in your mind that therefore those deals can be seen as a fragile thing and will be sooner or later violated by either side of the agreement?
Well, I mean, there's a few parts to that question. The first part is either sides. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that Israel would never break any peace agreement. Israel has never attacked another country that it wasn't attacked first. That isn't the way that we act. It isn't the way that we view the world, and it isn't the way that we do things. But the other part is the issue of this happening in a rather short period of time. It's not really a short period of time. It's a short period of time if you're sort of looking at it from a perspective of how the news looks. But when you're actually dealing with the situation in the Middle East, you know that these are relations that have been happening for a lot longer, and these are situations that have been going on for a greater period of time, and conversations that are really working and are moving forward. And so I think that these are deals that will continue and they'll push forward and will stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So you have one.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to ask you once again about China, because I ask you a question about China with regards to Iran. But there are many other countries in the Middle East, including Israel. There are some Chinese investments in Israel when it comes to technology, for example, primarily when it comes to technology. And the U.S. and Israel are very close, especially under President Trump. But it seems that Israel so far hasn't made a decision to ban Chinese to ban 5G made by Huawei. And there are Chinese investments in Israel as well. Do you think there are chances that Israel will not crack down on ties with, will not sever ties with Israel, just like President Trump wills Israel to do?
Look, I think there's a lot of angles and a lot of elements, and there are a lot of other important ties involved. At the end of the day, you can look at the close relationship, for example, that we have in Israel with Russia under Putin, a relationship that President Trump famously and clearly doesn't have either. And this is a relationship that serves multiple different purposes and needs and so on and so forth. And Israel often acts as an intermediary, for example, between the United States and Russia. This is something that many people know. And Israel also acts as an intermediary also between the United States and China. The investment that the Chinese has is mainly in Israeli businesses. It's not in anything governmental. It's not like you don't see airports, for example, being built by China or anything of such. And so I think that the relationship between Israel and China will stay or remain strong, as it should do. Israel also has its interests. And most importantly, it's the safety and security of its citizens and of the entire Middle East. And I think that this is always going to be Israel's priority. And again, it's the reason why Israel remains so close to Russia, also remains strong to the United States, and remains close to everybody. In Israel, we have to tread very carefully. We have to build as many relationships as we can and make sure that those relationships stand strong. Because at the end of the day, presidents change, politics change, the opinions of countries change. But what doesn't change is the fact that we're in a pretty tough region with tricky neighbors around us. And the ultimate goal of any prime minister of the state of Israel, and most definitely of Prime Minister Netanyahu, is the long-term safety and security of his people.
Johnny, at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned a very important thing, that President Donald Trump has kept his promise toward Israel, toward the Jewish community, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state and to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Do you think that Trump is the man of his word? What will be the impact of those decisions on the Middle East region? And do you have any thoughts? Why did we have to wait so long for a president ready to deliver his promise toward the Jewish community in the United States? Because the previous presidents, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, both promised Jews to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel and to move the American embassy there. But they failed to deliver those promises. Why Trump is different here?
Well, again, I think that what we've clearly seen as President Trump is a man of his word. What he says he'll do, he'll do. And this has surprised a lot of people and made a lot of people upset. People didn't believe that he'd do everything he said he would, whether it be moving the embassy or building a wall or all the other things that he said he'd do. He stood up and he did those things. And I think that this really has been something that surprised and shocked a lot of other people. And I think also part of the reason why the embassy was clearly a tricky thing for presidents to do in the past, moving of the Israeli embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, was also because people viewed dealing with the Middle East in a different way. People thought, and everybody, absolutely everybody, attacked President Trump at the time. They said, this will bring bloodshed, this will bring war, this will destabilize the region, So many things people said. And you know what happened? Absolutely nothing. If anything, it strengthened our position. It's enabled us to move forward with peace talks. Again, we've seen Bahrain, we've seen United Arab Emirates, we've seen Sudan. There are another few very significant countries that will be announced straight after the elections. if President Trump wins, and these are major and important deals. And I think that President Trump, as he said, in terms of keeping his word, he's shown that he's a man of his word. And as a very proud Israeli and a proud Jew, I'm remarkably grateful for him for doing all that he has until now in terms of supporting the state of Israel and making sure that continues and stays strong.
Okay, let's switch for a while to from international relations to U.S. domestic politics. I would like to ask you a question about the situation, what is happening around the Jewish community in New York City, because as far as we can hear, there is a tension between the Jewish community and the governor of New York and the mayor of New York City, and there were some riots recently, and there were as well some rallies, pro-Trump rallies, organized by the Jewish community. Have you heard of that? By the Jewish?
Of course. Again, look, the Jewish community is a very big word. It would be like the Polish community. When talking about Poland, the Polish community is made up of many, many different groups of people. It's made up of, just look at the last few days here in Poland. The Polish community is made up of peace supporters, it's made up of PL supporters, even made up of Konfederacja supporters, would you believe? But the Polish community is a broad community, as Jewish community. You have people who are Orthodox, you have people who are secular, you have people of every different kind. So there's never one voice for a Jewish community. The community that really pushed and were having rallies that were pro-Trump, that had quite a few issues with the governor of New York and of other places, was the Orthodox Jewish community, where there was a lot of push against them. For example, holding weddings and prayer groups and all of this stuff. But at the same time, people were marching in New York City. The rules were not being enforced for that group, however, were being enforced for the Jews, and they felt that, the Orthodox Jews, and they felt that unfair, and a lot of them came out and rallied. Within the Jewish community, again, there are many, many voices. The Orthodox Jewish community, by far and large, is in support of President Trump, if you read and understand polls correctly right now. And the secular community, the secular Jewish community, is by far and large in support of Joe Biden. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. So in terms of a Jewish community in New York, you've got many different kinds of Jews.
Okay. And do you want to ask a question?
Yes, you had very opportunity to meet President Donald Trump in person in his New York City apartment. As far as I can remember, it was 2011 maybe. Do you have any thoughts about Trump as a person privately? Is he a different person when you talk privately with him? Let's take about his appearance on the public television. We see a big guy, the president of the United States, but you met him in person. Is it the same guy?
No, I had the opportunity to spend a fair amount of time with President Trump before he was the president. I spent time with him in his office in New York City on one of his golf courses. And had an opportunity to speak to him in great detail about quite a few different things. One of the things that really sticks out was his interest and his understanding of the situation with Iran and everything happening there way back before, to be honest, he'd even thought about really running for president. And he is exactly the same person that you see on the TV. He is the same person that you see in the rallies in person. He is very smart. He's also very sharp and also very quick. And doesn't have much patience. You ask him a question, you're going to get a short answer, and if he asks you a question, you better give him a short answer. And really, that's the kind of person he is. He's a tough New Yorker. He's everything that you imagine he is in person.
Do you have? This is the last question. Do you have any predictions if it comes to the outcome of the U.S. presidential elections? If you have to say who will be the winner in your private opinion?
I think it's too close to call. Once again, I'm not a citizen of the United States. I'm simply an outsider who's looking from the outside in, and a prediction I think would be incorrect. The American people will give their voice tonight. They'll stand up and they'll speak, and whatever the decision of the United States and the people is a decision that obviously I'll accept, and we'll figure out how to work with and move forward in the future. And from my perspective, once again, as Israeli, as a European, and as a Jew, either president will be okay. Obviously, it would be very, very nice to continue with President Trump in the work that he's doing in terms of safety and security in the Middle East. But once again, I'm sure also that under Joe Biden, if he were to be named president, would also figure out a way to continue make that work as well.
So the citizens of Israel do not have to be afraid of potential Joe Biden administration, right?
Absolutely not. Again, it will be different. There'll be a difference in terms of how things are dealt with. That's for sure. But afraid, most definitely not.
Okay, Joe. Jonny Daniels, thank you very much for joining us. It was a great pleasure to host you. Thank you very much and have a great evening today. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Subskrybuj Wąski kanał, zostaw lajka i komentarz. Dołącz do naszej grupy Elektorat Wąskiego na Facebooku. Po więcej zdjęć i inspiracji z podróży wpadnij na Instagram.